welcome to Stand Up, It's the Friday Show. Thanks to everybody who joined me at the Thursday Night Hangout, which we do every Thursday for subscribers only. Always a great time. On the program today, I've got a first-time guest, an awesome guest. Really happy to have him joining me for the first time. Critically acclaimed author and constitutional attorney, Andrew Seidel. He is the author of a new book, American Crusade: How the Supreme Court is Weaponizing Religious Freedom. His first book is very good, important, and always relevant, sadly. The Founding Myth: Why Christian Nationalism Is Un-American. I really enjoy this guy's videos, his writing, and his appearances on television. He's been on with Bill O'Reilly and Fox News. He's been on with all kinds of actual Christian nationalists. That guy, Jesse Lee Peterson, who is huge on YouTube, and so much more. I love preparing to talk to him. He's probably writing or speaking about American history, the Constitution, religion, the law, his books, Religious Freedom, and why America needs national commitment to the separation of church and state most of the time. I think you're going to really like this conversation. You can support him on patreon.com/Andrew L. Seidel. And me, as always, at Pete Dominick, patreon.com/Pete Dominick, standupwithpete.com, because I can't do it without you. I think I know you're going to love this guy. Very smart, passionate. We had a great conversation. I was psyched to get him on. So let's do it right now with Andrew Seidel. All right. As I said, I have no idea how we have never connected before, but I hope this is the beginning of a long, loving relationship with Andrew Seidel. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining me.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
I have had so many people that I think are in your world on the program, and I'm sure you're familiar and respect most of them, if not all of them. But I wonder kind of who your inspiration was. Mine was my big brother, but was there an ideological person or experience that brought you to never see the light of religion?
No, I mean, I kind of grew up non-religious. My mom really encouraged me to do three things that I think made it virtually impossible for me. She's encouraged me to stand up to bullies, to question authority, and to visit various houses of worship with my religious friends of different stripes, right? So I went to Catholic Mass, I went to temple with my Jewish friends, and to me it kind of became obvious early on, like, they're all claiming to be right, but just that because they are right. And so the most obvious answer is that they're probably all wrong about this. And just, for me, I think that was her goal too.
What a terrible job she did. I mean, like, it is interesting to imagine, like, what if most parents just brought their children, just brought them to, without comment even, different houses of worship? Because I think I'm just thinking of this thought now, I think it's probably fair to say, as a child, if you are religious and go to any type of house of worship, you probably only see the inside of that one. Maybe you see different versions, but like, I didn't go into a mosque or a synagogue until I was over 20, until I moved to New York City, and I still only been a few, much less a black church. I've only been in a few. So I'm guessing if you gave kids a tour of each without comment, that probably would be an interesting exercise, don't you think?
I do think that. I mean, it certainly seems to work on me. Religion is really fascinating, especially in the United States. One of the reasons I think we have this diverse flourishing is because we have a separation of church and state, and that's what I've ended up dedicating my career to. I don't know if my mom intended quite that when she encouraged me to go visit all these. And she loves to tell this story, that when I went to my first bar mitzvah, I came home and I said, it was the most fun I've ever had. I want to convert to Judaism because I want to have that party. But that didn't stick either. Just wanted the party, apparently.
That's a pretty good argument. I mean, it depends on,
for a 12-year-old kid,
It depends on your experience with them. I mean, I know a lot of Jewish guys who will talk about their anxiety in the run up to that, because that's a scary performance. Is the point I was getting to. But I mean, the bonuses are if you get a good party, it is definitely and a rite of passage. I liked it watching them. But let me, you were trained as an environmental lawyer, right?
I mean, that was why I went to law school. Yeah, I thought I was going to save the planet. That was my goal. I was going to combat climate crisis and really do as much work as I could there in international environmental law. I actually did a fellowship in international environmental law. I wrote a guidebook about it that literally 6 people have read, and you can try to find, but you can't. I got a master's of law and environmental law. But I, at the same time, was really learning during law school about the rise of what we now are calling Christian nationalism, rightfully so, I think. And the
what time was that? Because
that was like 2007 to 2009 is when I was in law school.
Okay.
And then I got my master's of law in 2009, 2010.
Around the time the Antichrist was elected in the United States, really. I mean, how many people called Obama? I'm trying to remember how Christian nationalism looked into
Tea Party
at that time. Certainly, yeah, I covered the Tea Party for SiriusXM and CNN. I went to those rallies.
Yeah. I mean, that was the form it took, and it has that same Tea Party had that same top down flavor.
Yeah.
But tried to make it look grassroots, just like Christian nationalism right now. So one of the things that kind of started changing for me was seeing that the threat that Christian nationalism posed. And I was looking around at all of the issues that I cared about, LGBTQ rights, abortion rights, climate change, every issue, progressive issue that I really cared about. I saw the primary opponents were Christian nationalists. The people on the front lines fighting tooth and nail against it, the people in court fighting against it were these Christian nationalist organizations. And I'm looking around, and it's literally, every issue that you can think of at its most basic level, having a strong separation of church and state is going to improve the chances of getting to a solution at the very least. And so I started thinking, maybe this is the fight that I need to be in. And I talked with my sister, and she was like, "Well, how many environmental lawyers out there are there?" And I was like, "There's thousands, right? And they're all, so a lot of them are smarter than me, and they're doing really good work." She's like, "Well, how many are doing like church-state separation stuff?" And the answer is that there's less than 20 of us, and I know all of them. Right?
Well, I'm so glad that that's the path your career took. I love the way that you communicate. I think I might have discovered you on TikTok. I think you hit some vein where I was seeing you everywhere not too long ago. And then when I dug in your stuff, I was like, holy Christ, forgive me. I can't believe I haven't read this guy's books. So, but let me get back to your, it seems like one of the things I want to talk to you about, you're uniquely, I think, educated to deal with this issue, is how church-state issues, or how religious folks, especially in America, are dealing with, looking at, and talking about climate change. And you just shared this on your Twitter feed today with this Illinois Congressman, Chris Miller, who says, we don't need to worry about climate change because God made trees. And I'll throw the quote in, but talk to me about, as much as you want this, because to me, when we got the hottest day on records, climate change has been the issue I've talked about probably more than anything else. And the idea that people don't understand the science certainly travels in the lane of those who are often very religious and think, hey, listen, by the way, if the earth burns or if the humans burn off it, that's God's will too. Talk to me about any of that, because I really haven't explored it very much.
Yeah, there was the formative moment for me, and the reason I tweeted that out today, Illinois Representative Miller's statements, was because it reminded me of the formative moment. And this was back in, I want to say, October or November of 2010. So I was getting my master's in international environmental law. And Representative Shimkus, also from Illinois, who I don't remember his exact title, but he's in the U.S. House, and he was the head of a science committee, of maybe a subcommittee of some kind in the House. And he said something along the lines of, the Bible is the final word of God, and God said that the earth would not be destroyed by a flood. And he's referencing the story of Noah's Ark in Genesis there, right? He's invoking the Noah's Ark story to guide U.S. policy.
I found it. 2010, a Republican congressman hoping to chair the powerful House Energy Committee referred to the Bible and God on the issue of global warming. Representative John Shimkus insists we shouldn't be concerned about the planet being destroyed because God promised Noah it wouldn't happen again after the flood. Speaking before, a House Energy Subcommittee on Energy and Environmental hearing in March 20th, 2009, Shimkus quoted chapter 8, verse 22 of the book of Genesis. He said, quote, "As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease." Wow. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That ideology is a perfect example, and it's a Republican congressman before a House subcommittee. Wow.
Yep. And if when you start to notice these, you start to see them kind of all over the place. James Watt was the Interior Secretary for the Reagan administration, just died a couple of weeks ago. He argued the same kind of thing. He argued that God gave humans dominion over the environment, so we didn't have to worry about damaging it. And there's people who argue also that we don't have to worry about climate crisis because Jesus is going to come back before we could possibly ruin the environment to an extent that it would actually impact our lives. So, I mean, and that same kind of dominionism over the environment is the dominionism that they're seeking over our government. And that's what I'm doing every single day trying to fight against, right? That is what the separation of church and state is meant to stop.
Yeah, I mean, any issue that we talk about regularly here on this program and across the country, people are discussing, any concern, it can be always tied right back into the issue that you know as much about as any other American scholar, writer, or commentator, because of the strain of Christianity that not dominates America, but has a huge influence disproportionately in powerful places, including state, local, and federal government. So it would seem it also always comes back to the courts, and that's what your work has been so much about. Tell us where we are at in terms of, well, actually, a step back. How do you define, of course, Christian nationalism?
That is, I think, a great question. You'll get different answers depending on who you ask. I have some really great friends who are scholars in this space, Andrew Whitehead and Sam Perry, who have a very scholarly definition. They study Christian nationalism. They've written a great book on it called Taking America Back for God. They've done some surveys on it. Robbie Jones, who runs PRRI.
He's joined me several times. Yeah.
Amazing guy, slightly different definition of Christian nationalism. To me, I think that I like to talk about it as an existential threat. Christian nationalism is an existential threat to a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. I mean, that is first and foremost what people need to understand. It is not some scholarly debate about how America was founded. Were we founded as a Christian nation? Were we founded on Judeo-Christian principles? And I think that's how it was treated for a long time. We've been kind of ripping its mask off lately to show us what the exclusionary, violent movement that it is.
Yeah.
And I think it did a lot on January 6th to show the world what it's about. But I mean, really, the goal is to make it so that to be an American is to be a Christian, and to be a Christian is to be an American. Right? They want that Christian nation that they claim we were founded as to come back. And I really think it's important for us to be fighting those myths and that disinformation, because one of the things that they do constantly is they use the language of return to justify kind of all manner of hateful public policy, right? We've got to get back to our godly roots. We got to get back to the way that we were founded. You even see this working its way into Supreme Court opinions these days. So
make America great again.
Exactly. It's the
or
again.
Take that's obviously the Trump, but during the Tea Party you mentioned earlier, and when Obama was elected, it was always every day, take back America. And everybody that had the ability to speak would be like, from who? Who took it? Michelle and Barack? Is that? I think you mean Michelle and Barack. So anyway, go ahead. That language of taking back it.
Yeah, I mean, they want to get back to a time. And you can see this in the Supreme Court end of term decisions, right? They want to get back to a time when it was conservative, white, heterosexual Christian men who ruled, and everybody else was second-class citizens. That is the goal of Christian nationalism. That's the Christian nation that they are talking about reclaiming and reforging. And, a lot of the work that they're able to do is happening in the courts right now.
I lost you right then. Happening in the what right now?
In the courts right now. I mean, they're making so much progress now that they've packed the Supreme Court and put their fellow travelers there.
Yeah. I want to get to the Supreme Court and some of their decisions just from this past month. But I think I just want to get you to split a hair. Yeah. White Christian nationalists. I have a lot of listeners who are Christians. I'm thinking of a lot of black women. They know who I'm talking about because we've had these discussions before, and they don't love being thrown in that group. There's a lot of people who identify as Christian that you are certainly not categorizing in this group. How do you differentiate?
It's a really crucial distinction. I don't think it's a hair that you're trying to split there at all. I think it's an absolutely crucial distinction. There's a group that I've done a ton of work with called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. Both Andrew Whitehouse and Sam Perry and Robbie Jones, who I've mentioned, all of them are part of it. There are a ton of great justice-minded Christians out there who are working to fight Christian nationalism.
Demar Tisby, you talked to. I think he's a good example.
Yep, he's a great example. And in fact, I spearheaded a report on the role that Christian nationalism played in the January 6th insurrection. And I worked with Amanda Tyler at the Baptist Joint Committee to publish that report. Jamar Tisby contributed to that report, and his section was really, really fascinating because he talked about the difference between white Christian nationalism and essentially Black America's version of what a Christian nation would look like. And it is significantly different. In fact, they're polar opposites, right? Jamar told me, he's like, think of it, MLK's "I Have a Dream" coming true is what they are thinking of when they're talking about a Christian nation, which is completely opposite of what the white Christian nationalists who are fighting.
That's well said. I like that.
Yeah. Towards. Yeah.
And by the way, worth just mentioning, you went on this guy's show at least twice. I'm very familiar with him. He's a black right-wing Christian nationalist named Jesse Lee Peterson. And people have to go watch it. The way that you handle him is so unbelievably brilliant, including the way that you handle O'Reilly. Like, very few people would I say, go debate. You are as good as they come. But the point I bring up is this guy, Jesse Lee Peterson, hates black people. He's a black man. Says the worst things about black people. The point is, just on race and religion, there are a lot of black Christians who uphold white Christian nationalism, is how I want to say it. How do you say it? I mean, not many, not most, but just talking about him, that's what I was reminded of. That guy doesn't get a pass.
Yeah, and Catherine Stewart also contributed a section to that report. And one of the areas that she's been reporting on is how white Christian nationalism recognizes that it has a PR and image problem, and that it is fighting for white supremacy, and they are actively working to find people of color that they can bring into this movement to diffuse that criticism. So, I mean, this is something that they are actively trying to change. Not, I think, because of the values, but because of the PR problem.
One of the things that bothers me so much and triggers me as much as anything is when a guy like that or so many others talk about liberals hate God and don't. There's so many really progressive people who are actually religious, and a lot of different religions. I think people think about Christianity, but I'm thinking about a lot of Jewish people, certainly a lot of Muslim folks that are very progressive. Or, I mean, how do you talk? How do you react when someone says liberals hate religion and hate Christians? What do you generally just say? I was wondering about that.
I mean, it's such a silly criticism, and they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel when they get to that point. Yeah. I mean, I do a lot of work with justice-minded Christians, and here's the thing: America is a set of shared values, and Christian nationalism refuses to share. It excludes non-Christians. It excludes the wrong kind of Christians. Wrong being in quotation marks, right? Scare quotes, and. My friend Chrissy Stroop put this nicely. She said that shared values matter more than shared beliefs. And I agree with that. And I think that is especially true, that shared values matter far more when we as a nation are facing an existential threat like white Christian nationalism. Yeah, I personally am a godless heathen, right? I'm an atheist.
Yeah, me too.
But I would rather have a drink and a chat and, split some guacamole with a group of Christians who value anti-racism and social justice than a group of anti-equality atheists.
Guacamole, the devil's dip. Of course we could. I just made that up, by the way. I just that guy called you Satan's something. It was so funny because every time you were just tickled pink about it, and I was too as a viewer. I mean, I think that's that's all really important to say about the menu and the way that people, I think, choose and pick and how exclusionary they are as Christian nationalists. What do you mean, though, when you talk about shared values, not necessarily shared beliefs? I mean, I think I know what you mean, but an example would be...
I share a belief or a lack of belief with atheists, right? But I would rather hang out with Christians and fight against who want to fight against Christian nationalism than a group of atheists who are more aligned with Christian nationalists in their values, right? Like, I mean, honestly, my dream is to live in a country where the separation of church and state is valued by everyone, or as JFK said, where it's absolute, where we understand that true religious freedom can only exist with a secular government. When we get that there's no such thing as freedom of religion without a government that's free from religion. Right. I want to live in a country where where the nonprofit Americans United for Separation of Church and State that I work for is obsolete. I'd love to.
Has as much money as even a mid-sized church.
I want to put myself out of a job, right?
Fair enough.
I don't want to.
Well, I mean, as you say that, it's like the America that I grew up in upstate New York in the 1980s really was that. I remember thinking or learning just the simple idea of separation of church and state, because it was like, and the pilgrims coming here to escape religious persecution because they wanted to follow their wacky form of, whatever corn spirit worship thing that they do, and their belt buckle hats, whatever they wanted to do, they wanted to be able to do it, I guess. And I was like, hey, listen, that's cool that we go to school and there isn't religion, because there's a lot of different people like here, and you wouldn't want to just do one. So you teach all the religions, and you don't have to be religious also. Seems like a fair deal. You can worship however you want, as long as it doesn't hurt other people, or you don't have to. That seemed like the place I was growing up. Was I growing up in just obviously a certain region at a certain time?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we do at Americans United for Separation of State is take complaints from around the country of kids and families in public schools where they have an opposite experience, where there are teachers who are abusing their power and imposing their personal religion on other people's kids, or coaches, football coaches, doing so at the 50-yard line after games. And not just limited to schools, but to all kinds of violations about the separation of church and state. So, I mean, those things happen constantly throughout our country. Yours is, I think, the goal, right? That's what it should look like, and that's what a schooling where the separation of church and state is honored might look like. By the way, we walked to a different. Often it's not the case. Yeah,
we walked to a different building. Those of us whose families were making us go to, I was raised Catholic, kind of. It's a really funny story, because clearly my dad wasn't buying it. My mom didn't even take confession. Like, she went to church. She was like, she told us she wasn't buying it. So my brother punched out in like second grade. And then I hung in there till confession, or rather confirmation. Confession was the reason I left. And,
can I ask you this? Did you invent sins to confess?
No, I just told him I was a pretty good kid. Like, I ran my mouth a lot. So I was like, I said this to that person, and I swore. So I didn't make up stuff. I did one time. I got in trouble for mooning a school bus, and the priest was like, what do you mean? What does that mean, mooning? And I was like, well, I pulled on my pants and showed everybody in the bus my butt. And the priest was like, show me what you did, son. And so, no. That's a joke in my stand-up act. Then he comes crashing through the confessional like the Kool-Aid man. I mean, you have a whole, by the way, rant and thoughts about like time to quit the Catholic Church. I mean, I could listen to that forever. I find it just from the subject of minimizing women, making them second-class citizens before we get to anti-gay and the abortion stuff, and then maybe we can get to the fact that the whole place is a criminal enterprise of the worst type. But that's just me ranting.
I mean, I can do a mini rant on that. And
Go
that's
ahead.
Just if people have not read. I mean, there's so many different documents you could read, but the Pennsylvania grand jury report on the abuse in the Catholic Church and what they did to those kids, I read that because I had to write about it, and I still wake up some nights, with the visions of that flashing through my head. Nothing like that ever came close to happening to me, right? I don't have that kind of trauma.
Me neither.
These priests were giving kids gold crucifixes to mark them for the other predators to attack. I mean, just some of the most vile, gruesome, just disgusting stuff that you can possibly imagine. And I don't know how you can read through something like that and support the organization that is perpetrating it. Even just talking about it right now, I'm feeling sick to my stomach.
Yeah, well, just reading that grand jury report and talking about it now makes you feel that way. So how would we possibly imagine the trauma that it instills in most, not all, but probably most of its victims? And, you see there's a huge percentage of suicide, and obviously lives just completely destroyed, generations that they did this and have done this, and all across the planet. Let's talk about your most recent book, and it's really, I think, the most relevant issue, American Crusade, How the Supreme Court is Weaponizing Religious Freedom. Oh, that is a provocative title, sir.
I think so.
Was American Taliban taken already? Because that would have worked.
That probably is taken. I found out that after it was published that American Crusade is also taken by I guess we could call him a gentleman named Pete Hegseth, of Fox News.
Oh, didn't you debate him?
Yeah,
or didn't you go on
the air with him? Yeah, and I've been on with the air with him once, and then the second time, he actually didn't have me on. He had on 3 different Christian preachers to talk about my book without inviting me on to play a role.
Oh, did you make one? You should make a video responding to it all. Did you do one of those?
I did something at the time.
Oh, good. You're really good at the video stuff. Really, really good. So anyway, I'm just having fun with the title. It's a great title. I love it. But this is the issue of our time. I mean, you could just talk about this past month's decisions if you want. How is the Supreme Court weaponizing religious freedom? Because there's so many ways.
Yeah, I mean, religious freedom is what protects everybody who is listening to this right now. It's what guarantees, our right to be blasphemous, godless heathens, to say that yes, I am an atheist, or to be a Christian or to be a Catholic. It is what protects our right to reject every God or accept every God. In other words, it's long been a shield, right? It's been this hallowed protection against government overreach, the minority's protection from the tyranny of the majority. And it's a right that's been guaranteed by a strong separation of church and state. But not anymore. There is a well-funded, powerful network of these Christian nationalist organizations and judges. We're talking about $1 billion shadow network here. Yeah. It's been working to turn that protection of religious freedom that's enjoyed by all of us into a weapon of supremacy and privilege.
Are you talking about the Federal Society and the money that they got recently? And they've been on the case and very effective, as you write about, for 30 years.
Yes. I mean, Leonard Leo, plays a central role in my book. He is kind of universally recognized as the guy who orchestrated the hostile takeover of the Supreme Court. And I include a quote in the book of a former employee who described Leo's mission like this, quote, "He figured out 20 years ago that conservatives had lost the culture war. Abortion, gay rights, contraception, conservatives didn't have a chance if public opinion prevailed. So they needed to stack the courts." Right. So that's what they did. And I mean, notice the anti-democratic confession in that quote, right? If we don't stack the courts, the majority is going to rule. If we don't stack the courts, democracy is going to work. Right. Well, I mean, And overall, we know that Leo's groups spent about $540 million. That's what we could find, packing the court from 2014 to 2020. And you do not spend that kind of money to get an impartial court, right? You don't spend that kind of money to put impartial jurists on the court. They bought a court.
Yeah. And it's really been proven now with these decisions, which a lot of people predicted would happen, but a lot of people didn't think would happen, from the overturning of Roe v. Wade to several of these decisions along religious freedom in this past term. But I interrupted you. I almost just want you to read your whole book to me.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, it was a good investment on their part. There's another quote that I include about Leo's job during this time when they were packing the court. He was described as, quote, the monitor of the nominee's ideological purity. Right. And the monitor, and they were talking about judicial nominees, the monitor of the nominee's ideological purity. And all told, we know that Leo's responsible for the confirmation of Roberts, Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. Thomas is an old friend. All six of them are or were members of the Federalist Society. There's video that surfaced recently of Leo and Thomas on stage together at a Federalist Society event in Texas, I think it was, where Thomas is joking about how Leo's the third most powerful man in America. Right. So, I mean, that's 6 votes on the Supreme Court. And Leo personally chose 5 of them for their ideology. And it is this Crusader ideology that I detail in the book. And let me just give you one example, too.
By the way, isn't he? I mean, I've seen reporting that Leonard Leo is himself Opus Dei Catholic.
He's deeply conservative Catholic, which I do cover in the book. I believe he's a Knight of Malta. I believe it. I could have that there are several of those conservative Catholic orders, but I believe that's what he is. He goes to mass virtually every day and has an advanced person who travels to find him a Catholic church whenever he's on the road, so that he can get to mass. Has used his judicial nominees to impose this kind of Crusader ideology on the entire country through the judiciary. It's pretty remarkable.
I have an advanced person. Finds me.
I do not.
Find me the best public restroom on the side of the thruway, because I do not like to make that search on my own. So you were going to give me an example before I mentioned the Opus Dei thing of how this plays out.
No, I mean, like John Roberts. Yeah, John Roberts, I think, is because people, hopefully this is wearing off, but they some say he's a moderate, say he's a centrist, right? But he argued that public schools can impose religion on children at graduation ceremonies, that Christian Bible clubs can use public schools to organize. When he was in the Reagan White House, he supported a constitutional amendment that would allow public schools to impose Christian prayer on school children. And we have a memo that he wrote from the time. And he said this: we still have an uphill battle to return prayer to schools, right? We battle, return prayer to schools. I mean, that is the language of a crusader.
I mean, you're changing the framing. I think how a lot of people are seeing him as this moderate with those kinds of quotes. And I think you could probably do an even more extreme job on old Sam Alito. What's his? Isn't he a 1700s guy? He's like a 1700s guy, I think.
I mean, he's certainly got the thinnest skin.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's for sure.
It's pretty remarkable. But, I mean, people. I think people might object to singling out justices here and there, but the data is really remarkable here as well, right? But this ploy to capture the courts has worked. I mean, we've got studies that show it. So there was one study that I cover in the book that was done, and it actually doesn't cover the 2 most recent terms, the one that just ended and the one that ended before, the one that ended last year when they overturned Dobbs and the coach that was imposing prayer on other people's kids. So the numbers are actually more dramatic than what I'm about to tell you. But before the courts were packed, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of religion about half the time, right? And that's like almost exactly what you'd expect, right? Like, flip a coin, 50-50. But under Roberts, one study found that win rate jumps to 81% in favor of religion. And the most important thing is that this is not a pro-religion shift, but a pro-Christian Christian shift. So in early courts, Christianity won about 44% of the time. And under Roberts, that almost doubles up to 85%. And actually, again, that number is going to be significantly higher now after the last two terms. So in this court, religious freedom has become a weapon of Christian privilege.
Well, I was reading about what they were trying to do in Texas. The state legislature passed a law recently that was going to, you were going to have to post the Ten Commandments up in a classroom. And there was all these really weird stipulations, like it had to be within eyesight and it had to be large enough to see it from every part in the room and all this stuff. But the argument, a lot of the con law scholars I respect and follow, generally even across the spectrum, like, well, that's not going to pass the Texas Senate because they see what that might lead to, which it might lead to allowing other religions and Satanists like you and I to post up, whatever we want as well, because what a law, if you pass that law, you wouldn't be preventing other religions. How is that not always the case with a lot of these religious freedom arguments? How do they always come down on the side, almost always on, at least it would seem, on Christian nationalists and their beliefs?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's one of the things that I cover in American Crusade. I work to put a face on those numbers that I mentioned and to address exactly that question, because the new guiding principle of this Supreme Court is not the Constitution or even the law, let alone, forget about facts and reality, right? Like the new guiding principle of this Supreme Court is Christianity wins. That is what this court is bent on. And, I could spend some time getting into the open forum laws and government speech versus private speech. And, all of that would apply if we had judges and courts that cared about fairly applying constitutional principles to facts and to statutes that the Texas legislature passed. But I'm not at all convinced that that's what we have right now. And that Texas bill, by the way, was one of the most absurd things I've ever seen. Not only did they say you have to post the Ten Commandments, the bill itself included the text of the Ten Commandments. In other words, the Texas legislature wrote its own version of the Ten Commandments. So you have state-approved scripture in this case, right? And it's not what is reflected in the Bible itself. They actually went and omitted certain passages that are, shall we say, problematic, which if you could see my first book if you want to learn more about that.
Well, yeah, I learned a lot in preparing to talk to you and reading some of your work about, in a lot of these debates about America's founding. And this just came up yesterday when Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri started quoting what he considered founding fathers and their beliefs. And you tweeted about this and talked about this. Say a bit about either that or the arguments that we hear so often that America was founded on Judeo-Christian. I feel like I've heard presidents like Barack Obama say that. It doesn't seem like that's that controversial until I watched you debate that. And I was pretty convinced of your argument. So what about the beginnings here do you want to mention with Senator Hawley's tweets or anything else?
Yeah, so this is the subject of my first book, The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism Is Un-American. And I wrote that book because Christian nationalism is an entire identity that is based on disinformation, right? It's based on this lie that America was founded as a Christian nation, that we were based on Judeo-Christian principles, right? That's what the lie they work to promote. And that's what Hawley was promoting in his tweet. That's what I work to debunk in The Founding Myth. To me, this is just it's a fundamentally un-American lie. And it's one of the reasons is because our Constitution guarantees a secular government, a secular state. And this is one of the ways that we protect religious freedom. And this is one of the truly unique and original things that our Constitution did.
Yeah.
Our Constitution was the first to declare that power comes from people, not gods, right? The words "we the people" are right there at the beginning, and they're poetic, but they're also so much more. Our Constitution was the first governing document not to mention a god or a deity. And it's godless by choice. not by accident. There were people in the founding generation who objected to that choice, and there was a push 50 years later to get the Constitution amended to include Jesus Christ, and that push has been revived several times throughout our history. Our Constitution was the first to ban religious tests for public office in Article 6, and that was actually the only mention of religion in the original unamended document. And wow. That ban is some of the most clear and emphatic language in a document that is often deliberately vague. It says, no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust, right? No, shall, ever, any. I mean, that's very clear and emphatic language. So the wall of separation between church and state is an American original. It is an American invention. The idea was floating around in the ether of the Enlightenment, but it was first implemented in the American experiment. And until then, no other nation in the history of the world had sought to protect the ability of its citizens to think freely by separating religion and government. And we should be proud of that.
Yes.
We certainly shouldn't undermine it with myths about a Christian founding.
So well said, Andrew Seidel. So well said. I love that rant in any version of it. It's really good. And I mean, that you are the guy to talk to about this. The first book, The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American. It's an impossible case to beat, the one that you've written and defended. I think I've heard you say you believe in the only solution right now to the issue around the Supreme Court is to add justices, at least to see any kind of change within our generation based on how long these ones are likely to live and so on. And I want you to make that argument, but I'll just say beforehand, it just seems so highly unlikely that Democrats could even get that done, even if they had the political courage, that they would have the votes to be able to make it happen.
I mean,
because you need a supermajority in the U.S. Senate, right?
With the filibuster in place, yes, you would. And that's one of the reasons that I've been something of an evangelist for this, is because we need to change public opinion in favor of it. I mean, there's two things I think that are prerequisites to having this conversation. And the first is recognizing that whatever issue you care about, whatever policy issue you are most deeply concerned about, the Supreme Court stands in the way of that being implemented. Right? I mean, look at what it did. The affirmative action is gone. Student loan forgiveness, which is clearly within the power of the Department of Education based on congressional statute, is gone because of a made-up thing, the Major Questions Doctrine, which essentially amounts to some Supreme Court justices have some feels about
women's reproductive rights, though someone might make the argument the court never should have decided to begin with. But to me, I mean, race, religion, gender rights and equality. But to me, the environmental regulations that they've been able to overrule at the Supreme Court.
Absolutely.
And most importantly, and I don't know if this one has to do with religion, but it certainly has to do with the First Amendment, which you're an expert on. Speech, money is speech, and Citizens United. So all, yes, exactly what you said. All of no matter what you care about, the court, go ahead. I'm just trying to make it even stronger.
No, I mean, absolutely. And take the abortion example, right? Like, okay, let's pass the Women's Health Protection Act and we'll overturn the Dobbs decision. Great. What happens when the Women's Health Protection Act is challenged and gets before the Supreme Court?
Right. Or anything else, guns.
Yeah. I mean, this court, so that's starting position number one. And the second position is that you have to wrap your mind around this simple fact that the Supreme Court has already been packed, right? The Supreme Court was captured. I did the numbers earlier, $540 million spent to capture the Supreme Court. You don't spend that kind of money to put impartial jurists on the court. Now, starting from that position,
Sheldon Whitehouse wrote a book called Capture, and he, I mean, it's not like Andrew Seidel's, sole exclusionary belief. I mean, this is a U.S. senator who I think has a lot of integrity outside of his weird white golf club in Rhode Island. Sheldon Whitehouse writing Capture about the Supreme Court. You're spot on.
I highly recommend it. Yeah, I mean, it's a great book. Like so the question is, if the court is already packed and if the court is already captured, what do we do about it? And the answer, if your answer is nothing, then again, see point number one, where expect to lose on every progressive issue before this court.
Right.
So to me, there are some creative solutions around. We could try to do we could try to do term limits. Yeah. I think that's problematic from the lifetime appointment.
Maybe just a code of ethics to start. Maybe
code of ethics would be helpful.
Just start with
that'd be a great
some
start.
Rules that you can't do, and but nobody.
But I do not think we ought to reward a political movement that sets out to capture one branch of our government and spend $500 million doing so by not doing anything about that.
Right.
I think that is a political act that requires a solution.
Yes.
We cannot allow that kind of behavior to work. We can't reward it by doing nothing. And so even if you don't care about those progressive policy solutions, I think you have to.
You know what? I'd love to see. I'm going to give you an assignment because who the hell am I? Which is like I'd love to see you write the speech that a Senate candidate running, I guess it would have to be as a Democrat, should make. When asked the question, would you approve? Would you vote to add justices to the Supreme Court? Because the speech should be along the lines of, listen, I wish we weren't in this situation, but as long as they've taken rights from and then list all the rights that they're taking, we have to restore those rights. We have to. And, that's the speech that I think should be the litmus test for a Democrat running for Senate. And I think you should write it. And
I'd love to. I mean, there are a number of members of Congress who already agree on Supreme Court expansion. In fact, they have to
sell it. That's what you're doing. You sell it well. They have to sell it. Members of the media have to sell it. People with some more columnists. I mean, like it's kind of a hard sell to some people until you hear someone like you make it, and then it's pretty good, pretty easy. So I think that they need to back the vote up with a convincing argument. Is what I'm saying.
Okay, I'll work on it.
Like right now, leave, go do it right now. It's such a condescending last few minutes. I was coming from a point of view of a fan. I was trying to praise your work, but I just gave you more work. It would be the kind of thing I'd pay for. Andrew, it's like everybody should your books and everything else. Go follow him and support him on Patreon. He's doing really, really important work. Really appreciate you joining me, man. And I hope that we can talk again.
Absolutely. I'd love to come back, Pete. It was an absolute pleasure.
All right, there you go. That is it, and we are out, but probably back tomorrow with yet another conversation, trying to get Christian Finnegan to join me. I think Ophira is out yet again. Hard to get her on these Fridays, but I will get her back for sure. Can't thank you enough for joining me and supporting me this week. I love you guys. You are the best. I cannot continue to do this work without you, so thanks for your subscription. You can always edit your pledge up, which so many of you have done. And that's it. That's all I've got. John Carroll taking us out right now. Maddie Carlson in Harrisburg tonight. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania at Mara Quinn's place. She's hosting him. So very cool. Check that out if you're anywhere around Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Have a great weekend. And hopefully I will talk to you tomorrow right here on Stand Up.
You gotta stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You gotta stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. Stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up and show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.